Good afternoon and welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We've had our lunch break and we are continuing in the hearing in docket numbers 2023-16E and 2023-17E concerning the 2023 avoided cost proceedings of Duke Energy Carolinas LLC and Duke Energy Progress LLC. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. Again, I note for the record that Commissioner Irvin and Vice Chair Powers are on leave today. We had finished with Commissioner questions of the panel, and I think we're back to Duke for any redirect.
Hey, Chair Belzer, Duke just has a few redirect questions for Mr. Johnson, and we are going to let Mr. Snyder off the hook. Mr. Johnson, do you recall when Chair Belzer was asking you questions about DEC's communications with Converse?
Yes.
Can you briefly describe the interactions your team had with Mr. Lamb and his team leading up to and following the termination of the Converse PPA?
Yes. So I think it was October of 22, we got together between Converse and a couple of my team, got together and talked about the upcoming expiration of their current contract. And we talked about, what are they planning for, for post-retirement, post-termination of the contract. And it was decided at that time by them to wait until early in 23 to get back together and discuss those potentials. So in early 23, the same people, my understanding is the same people got together and had meetings, several meetings, exchanged several emails, had some phone calls to discuss the path moving forward. And it was ultimately Converse's decision to stay on the variable rate.
Okay, and do you know whether your team had any back and forth with Converse after that date of termination? Do you recall?
I think there might have been some discussion. I do know there was discussion about, we provided Converse information about the upcoming filed rates and how those rates were going to be higher than what they, currently had.
And are DEC personnel generally available to Converse to discuss any billing issues?
Yes.
Okay, and does DEC make meter reading information available to customers in the event of a billing dispute or other issues like that?
Yes.
Do you recall Commissioner Thomas asking you questions about whether you thought DEC had overpaid Converse during that PPA extension?
Yes, I do recall that.
Okay, and just to make sure the record's clear, the PPA Converse signed with DEC in 2013 was for a 5-year term, is that right?
Correct.
And back in 2013, Converse had the option to sign a 10-year contract, is that right?
Yes, I believe that's correct, subject to check.
And if, again, subject to check, but if Converse had elected that 10-year contract option, that would have been subject to substantially similar rates. Do you know that?
Yeah, I don't know that right offhand, but I would guess that a 10-year at that time would be somewhat close to a 5-year, that same time frame.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Very limited recross. Converse Energy.
Mr. Snyder, a couple of the commissioners.
Chair Belser, I'm sorry, but I not practice for the commission often, but my understanding from council is that the scope of recross is on redirect. And so if we didn't ask any questions of Mr. Snyder, then the scope of recross should be limited to the topics that were addressed in the redirect of witness Johnson.
May I be heard?
Yes, sir.
To the extent the commissioners brought up new areas of testimony with Mr. Snyder, I think due process would require that Converse be allowed to question Mr. Snyder about his answers. Otherwise, there's no confronting the witness.
Chair Belser, I would just say that Mr. Trini had a full opportunity in cross-examination to ask questions both about what Mr. Snyder testified to, as well as areas that Mr. Snyder didn't testify to. So to the extent the commission had informational questions or other questions that it was in its prerogative to explore with the witness, that's perfectly appropriate, but that doesn't support recross that's beyond the scope of limited redirect.
You know, this comes up occasionally, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to allow him or any party to explore on the commissioner's questions. If you feel the need, and this will be a one-time shot, for a redirect based on this, and maybe the answer is that I always go back to the tendering party, whoever witness it is, and let them go last. But we'll figure it out, but I'm going to allow some leeway here. Go ahead, Mr. Trini.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
If you feel prejudiced, let me know when we finish. The recross, excuse me.
Thank you, Chair Belser.
Mr. Snyder, you discussed a performance adjustment factor, a PAF, right? Did I get that term right?
You did.
Okay. And you discussed that with both Commissioner Caston and Commissioner Belser and maybe even some other commissioners. And just to make sure I understand what you said, the PAF is a multiplier that is applied to the avoided capacity rate, correct?
Yeah, I'm going to clear that it is a multiplier to the cost of a turbine that's used in the ultimate determination of the rate. The rate itself, as filed in the application, has a PAF in it. So you don't take the rate and then apply a multiplier.
Yeah, that's right. It's internal. It's what gets you to the avoided capacity rate.
Correct.
And in Duke Energy Carolinas' case, it was 1.05.
Correct.
And you work with Duke in both Carolinas, correct?
I do. In
And
DEC and DEP?
right.
Yes.
And you remember Commissioner Belser was asking you about a multiplier. And in North Carolina, they have biannual avoided cost proceedings as well, don't they?
They do.
And the last order that was issued in the North Carolina avoided cost proceedings was in 2022, correct?
The order came out in 22, I believe, yes.
Okay. And that order provided for a performance adjustment factor, did it not?
It did.
And in the case of small run-of-the-river hydro...
Chair Belser, I'd object. There's no question that was asked by a commissioner that led to going to dockets in North Carolina, which could have been pre-filed in Mr. Lamb's testimony, could have been presented to the commission to have a more clear factual record of the representations being made, which Mr. Schneider is now making subject to check. And this is completely unrelated to any question that Commissioner Caston or any other commissioner for that matter raised with the commission.
Commissioner Belser? It's related to your question.
I did ask the question about having a separate hydro rate. Did North Carolina have a separate hydro rate and separate solar rate, I think?
I think you used the term multiplier.
I'm not sure I used multiplier, but
And I don't recall it being specific to a performance
Well,
adjustment
anyway, may I proceed? Or
let's get there.
I'm getting there.
Subject to, yeah, we'll let me see where we're going.
Mr. Snyder, I just handed you a copy of an excerpt from the North Carolina Commission's order dated November 22nd, 2022, in docket number E100 sub 175, and that's the avoided cost proceeding from 2021. Is your recollection that's the last avoided cost proceeding in which there was a ruling?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if you'll turn to the second page of what I handed you, at the bottom of page 20 in that order, the North Carolina Commission said as follows, and I want you to make sure I got this right. The Commission is not persuaded by Duke's proposal to discontinue the 2.0 PAF for run-of-river hydro QFs that are subject to the standard offer. Although the hydro stipulation has expired and no party offered any justification for extending the 2.0 PAF, the parties did not fully litigate the issue in this proceeding, and accordingly, the Commission directs Duke to continue the 2.0 PAF for run-of-the-river hydro QFs that are subject to the standard offer. Did I get that correct?
You did.
And is it your understanding that in North Carolina, for run-of-the-river hydros that are 1 megawatts or less, there is a PAF of 2.0 in effect for Duke Energy Carolinas?
That is correct in North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder.
South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
No questions.
Thank you. Sasiba?
No questions, thank you.
Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions.
Commissioners? Mr. Brightworst?
I don't have any questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your testimony and your patience today. Appreciate you being here. You may stand down. Thank you.
And Chair Belser, could we ask that the witnesses be excused at this time, subject to being recalled either by the company or the commission as needed?
Subject to being recalled, I'd put it on you if you let your witness go and we need to ask them something, so.
Well, they will be monitoring the hearing and available
Okay.
to the extent they're needed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else from Duke?
No, Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Converse Energy?
Converse calls Tim Lamb.
Mr. Lamb, when you get settled, I'm going to ask the court reporter to administer the oath to swear you in, please.
Sir, raise your right hand, please. Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Mr. Lamb.
There you go. Oh, you just turned it off. That's on. Thank you.
Testing.
Mr. Lamb, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 9 pages of direct testimony in this docket?
Yes, I did.
And did you cause corrections to be filed to your 9 pages of direct testimony on August 10th, 2023?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any other changes you wish to make to your direct testimony?
No, I do not.
If I were to ask you the questions in your direct testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, I move to introduce the corrected direct testimony of Tim Lamb as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Trini, those were written corrections that were filed on
Yes, ma'am, they're
last
red lines
Thursday. Okay.
and filed Thursday.
I think I missed
Friday.
those, but we will accept the amended direct testimony from Mr. Lamb. We will read it into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, and I'll have him explain what the corrections were. They were minor. Did your testimony, Mr. Lamb, have 5 exhibits numbered TL1 through TL5?
Yes, they did.
Do you have any changes you want to make to those exhibits?
No.
Madam Chair, I move to introduce the TL1 through TL5 exhibits of Mr. Lamb's direct testimony into evidence.
Mr. Lamb's direct pre-filed exhibits titled Exhibits TL1 through TL5 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 8 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you. Mr. Lamb, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 6 pages of surrebuttal testimony in this docket?
Yes, I did.
And did you make one correction to your surrebuttal testimony that was filed with the Commission on August 10th, 2023? Do you have any other changes you wish to make to your surrebuttal testimony?
No other changes.
If I were to ask you the questions in your surrebuttal testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, I move to introduce the corrected surrebuttal testimony of Mr. Lamb as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Lamb's corrected pre-filed surrebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Mr. Lamb, did your surrebuttal testimony have 2 exhibits, TL6 and TL7?
Yes, it did.
Madam, do you have any changes you wish to make to those exhibits?
No.
Madam Chair, I move to introduce the exhibits to Mr. Lamb's surrebuttal testimony into evidence at this time.
Mr. Lamb's surrebuttal exhibits TL6 and TL7 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit 9 and received into the evidence of this case.
Mr. Lamb, what do you do for a living?
I'm an electrical engineer, have a degree in electrical engineering from the University of New Hampshire.
I was going to ask you about your educational background. Are you a registered engineer in South Carolina?
No, I am not.
Okay. What's your work experience?
When I left the University of New Hampshire, I went to work for General Electric Company and worked for them for 11 years as a field engineer, ultimately as a commissioning project manager in heavy industry, steel, paper, marine. My last assignment with General Electric was site manager on at the time, the world's largest wind turbine in Boone, North Carolina.
How did you become associated with the Clifton Dam No. 3 power station?
Well, after being involved with the wind turbine, that was after the 1978 PERP Act was passed, which my understanding at the time was to promote renewable energy resources to be reactivated and to eliminate the country's dependence on foreign oil. The wind turbine was designed to feed power into a utility grid. So that got me interested in any form of alternative energy. But one of the most proven forms was hydroelectric. In the South, there were a lot of retired hydroelectric dams that weren't any longer producing power for an industry. They might have at one time, but they had been retired when utility rates got to be inexpensive. But the PURPA law required utilities to purchase energy from a renewable energy resource at avoided cost rates. And so I toured the South looking for retired dams and came across the Clifton Dam No. 3 power station, the old Converse Mill No. 3 in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
This is one of the exhibits to your testimony. It's exhibit TL1. What does that show?
Well, that's a picture looking down at what used to be the powerhouse. Clifton Manufacturing or Clifton Manufacturing sold the 3 textile mills on the dam. There are 2 other dams about 1.5 miles apart along the river. Sold them to Dan River Corporation and in the 60s. And by the end of the 60s, Dan River had closed the textile mills. The powerhouse, there used to be steam boilers, powerhouse, along with the hydroelectric turbines and hydro plant at the site. The building had gotten to be dilapidated, so they actually demolished the powerhouse, sold anything that had a value, meaning copper out of turbines or copper out of generators and so on. So all that was left there was the dam, the existing foundation that you can see around the gray building. At one time, that was a brick building with the roof line on the top of the picture you can see. So the only thing left were the water turbines.
So when was this power station first built?
It was built in the late 1880s to supply power to a textile mill that was originally built right along the river. So it supplied power mechanically through belts and shivs and so on. In 1903, there was a huge flood in the river basin that wiped out all 3 textile mills, totally destroyed the mill that was along the river. So Clifton Manufacturing built a 5-story brick mill building up on the hill, which would be behind where that picture was taken, and electrified the turbines, put generators on the turbines so that they could power the textile mill with electric motors as opposed to the mechanical drives.
And when did that mill close? I think you said.
In the 60s is when it,
Okay.
before Dan River purchased it.
And you bought it from Dan River, you said.
No.
When was that?
In 1983, and I'm not correct. Dan River did operate the mill for a while and then close it not long after they purchased it. But when the dam was put up for sale, actually for bids, as a result of the PURPA law, people were interested in reactivating retired hydroelectric projects.
So what did you do to the facility when you bought it in '83?
Well, all that was there was the dam and the turbines. My thought process was the turbines were just cast iron and probably not too valuable in a scrapyard, so probably the internals of the turbines were still usable. So we had to buy all new electric equipment, transformers, switchgear, and a gearbox to drive a generator, new generators for both turbines, to make the plant be able to produce power into the grid.
And when did you begin selling power to Duke?
Well, today is sort of an anniversary day because tomorrow, August 15th, will be the 38th anniversary of the 38th year that we've produced power out of the project. We bought it in 1983 and put the first turbine online August 15th, 1985.
And are you paid according to the schedule PP?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now, in your testimony, you refer to something called an average variable rate. Can you explain to the commission what an average variable rate is?
Well, that's probably part from the engineer in me and also as a business person. Duke's scheduled PPs have always been made up of energy rates and a capacity payment. For 33 years, we were on the rate schedule or structure prior to this, what I call convoluted or granular rate structure that began, I think, in 2019 or 2020. But all of the scheduled PPs list the rates in cents. So that's just how I've always equated the revenue capability. On a hydroelectric project that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for instance, in days when the rain doesn't change, our output daily probably doesn't change 1% a day. It may gradually decline as river flows fall off, but it's very consistent. So with a hydro project, you can take the scheduled PPs and time average those rates over a full year, and you come out with an annual average rate. And historically, if we look at the dollars revenue that we receive from Duke Energy versus the average rate, it will come out within 0.1%. or easily within 1%. This year it's less than 0.1%.
And in your testimony, I think you included a chart that I'm going to show right here. And it was on page 4. Tell the commission what this chart is. Do you need a copy of it?
I don't, no, I don't have
It's,
I have of the chart.
yeah.
I can see it here.
Oh, okay.
That's fine.
What did we do here in this chart?
This chart is, it's really not the avoided cost rate. It is the avoided cost rate that was paid to Converse Energy since we began production in 1985.
Is
So-
that the average variable rate?
Yes, that's the average variable rate that I just described.
And so it begins, I think the first value on it is 0.0325.
Correct. That was the rate that we were paid when we first put the plant online. At that time, they were only a variable rate. I don't think a long-term rate was even offered.
And you went to 0.558 for a long time.
Yes,
And now you're on this variable rate of 0.0274. Is that correct?
correct. The interesting thing about the current scheduled PP or avoided costs, in the past, as the avoided cost rates were filed, generally the variable rate would be the rate that you automatically went to if you had been on a long-term rate, a fixed rate contract. You would default to the variable rate of whatever rate was in effect at the time. And generally, they were close to the rate that you might have been getting on a long-term rate. This current scheduled PP that was passed in 2021, not the proposed rates, dropped that variable rate to 2.67 or 74 cents we have on that. It varies a little bit monthly, I think due to the granular rate structure, but it does vary a little bit. But it's 2.77 maybe is the spreadsheet number, which
And
is a
you-
50% reduction in the rates that we essentially had been getting for more than a decade.
And you could get more on a 10-year rate, but and we'll talk about that in a minute. But have the rates by Duke, offered by Duke to Converse, kept up with inflation?
No. Quick answer.
Okay. The cost, the consumer price index?
No, not the consumer price index either. Cumulative inflation from 85 to 23 is 182%. The CPI is up 276%. This Duke's avoided cost rate is down 15%.
And your exhibit number 3 to your testimony is the history of Duke's rates. And of course on the DNS, they're small. I blow them up, I guess, but I brought some larger copies that I'll hand up, if that's okay. In that exhibit number 3, can you explain to the commission generally what you've put down on it?
Basically, what that is a listing of the rates that were paid to Converse Energy. The years on the very left, and those dates are basically when new avoided cost schedules were approved. The column under CD3PS, Clifton Dam Number 3 Power Station, is the average annual rate that it was getting from that date on. So you can see we started in 1985 at 3.25 cents. In 2013 is when we signed this last 5-year scheduled PP, which only offered 5 years. It didn't have a 10-year rate on it, but that was a 5.58 cents a kilowatt hour. And a quick definition, just so you can equate numbers. 5.58 cents per kilowatt hour is $55.80 per megawatt hour. A megawatt hour is 1,000 kilowatt hours, so you just use 1,000 multiplier. again, the reason I've always done things in cents is that's the way the Schedule PPs are written in cents, but for larger solar projects, greater quantities of energy, it makes sense to use a bigger multiplier. But
And I'm going to hand you your exhibit number 4, which again,
Okay.
I've been to accommodate probably my eyesight more than yours. That copy, you know, so that you have copies for the commission. And it's the same exhibit that was filed with your testimony, maybe just a little more readable. Can you tell the commission what this is?
this is what I created as the 8760. With the new granular rate structure, the rate periods are broken into 9 different rate periods or 9 different rates over different periods, depending on which month of the year it was. Just to go back to the rate structure that we had until this last contract ended officially in 2018, or it got extended to February 7th of this year. There were 4 rates that we were paid in a year. An on-peak and an off-peak rate. 4 months of the year, what are called the shoulder months, and then a different on-peak and off-peak rate for the winter and summer months. Winter and summer months were paid the same at the different rates. Our metering at site had 2 registers, actually 3 registers, total energy produced, an on-peak register and an off-peak register, so that we could see at site how we produce the power and which rate it was accumulated in. This is taking the current, not the proposed, but the current Schedule PP and reading the time periods and different rates and populating the spreadsheet to the rate for every hour of the day. This is what I was requesting from Duke, just to confirm my spreadsheet. And I'm going to point out a mistake here.
Okay.
Because if you look at March, there are hours where the rate was 0.
Mhm.
Well, I may be complaining about Duke's rates, but I won't accuse them of not ever paying anything for it. And as soon as I saw that, we found the mistake and corrected the spreadsheet to where the average annual rate under the current Schedule PP should be 4.59 cents, not 4.29 cents.
And that's the gist of the correction you made throughout your testimony. was
Yes.
On what we filed on August
Because
10th.
we use that 4.29 cents to calculate percentages of increase and so on. So it changed the percentages, a few percent, as you can see from the red line markups. But
Now, how do the proposed rates in this docket, the 10-year proposed rates, and you are familiar with the ones that are being offered now, are you?
yes, how do the new rates compare to this docket?
Yeah.
Or to
yeah.
this rate?
Yeah.
Well, these are the proposed rates. The rate that I'm on right now, the average annual value is 3.38 cents. So yes, these rates increased.
Mm-hmm.
Cannot deny that at all. However, if I were to sign up for this 10-year contract right now,
Mm-hmm.
I would receive 4.29 cents a kilowatt hour, as opposed to the 5.58 that we've received for well over a decade. So it would be a rate reduction, and
Compared to what you got all those years.
correct. And one of the lessons from participating in this hearing is it's made you go back and look at business a little bit, how your business is done, and the fact that our revenue has not increased for over a decade explains some of the maintenance shortfalls that we have. Just, you can't get as far on the money today as you did 10 years ago, plain and simple.
Chair Belzer, I just wanted a clarification. I was looking at Mr. Lamb's amended direct testimony or corrected direct testimony, and it looks, I think he just said that the corrected number was 0.0429 per kilowatt hour, but I think it's 0.0459. Just want to make sure that's correct in the record.
I think
Okay,
you said
yes,
4.5.
4.59 cents a kilowatt hour.
Okay, And also, I just wanted to clarify, are we still on the direct summary?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
making sure.
How much money have you invested in this facility?
To get ready for the testimony, I went back and looked what had been capitalized. We've run the place for 38 years, so most of the equipment's been capitalized. It's listed about $500,000, but over the years, we've had to do a lot of major overhauls to keep the plant reliable and operating so that it operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So 500 is in your testimony. You'll stick to
Yes.
that, right?
Yes,
And are there more improvements needed?
yes.
What do you need to do?
We need to rebuild the horizontal turbine. Before we started producing power, we rebuilt both turbines. The horizontal turbine, one turbine's horizontal, one's vertical, just for nomenclature, and that's the shafting in the turbine. But the horizontal turbine needs a rebuild. It needs parts. To make these parts, in the case of the other turbine, we actually took original parts to pattern makers, had patterns made, took them to foundries, had foundries cast the parts, took them to machine shops, and had the machine shops machine the pieces. You can't order these parts today. The plant is just too old.
Are you going to be able to make these improvements under the proposed rates?
Not at the 5.58 cents. That's my Boy Scout training as an Eagle Scout was to practice the motto of being prepared. And we should have had these parts on a shelf ready to go in so that we could just go into the turbine and overhaul it today. But as I said a minute ago, it's made you look at business a little bit, and the reason the flat rate for a decade just has taken its toll. There's no two ways about it.
There was some discussion about verifying compensation. Are you able to verify what you're paid for by what currently that you're being paid accurately?
That gets into this granular rate structure. Again, with the 2019 or 2020, whatever year it was approved, granular rate structure, the energy is billed on different times of the day, weekends, months, and so on. We still have the existing metering at the plant that I just described that has total kilowatt hours produced, on-peak energy and off-peak energy with respect to the rate structure that we just ended, that ended it in February. So we can verify with total kilowatt hours, the total kilowatt hours on the bill, but we have no way of knowing from the bill that the correct amount of energy was billed in the correct period or correct rates. Admittedly, you can take the bill and add the total of the different rate chunks, and they equal the total kilowatt hour number. But, and the other thing to bring out here now is with this granular rate structure, if you look at the 8760 sheet that we put together, the rates vary. In January, 6.05, the average rate for a month, 4.18. I'm just picking July, some different months, 3.54 in October. With the old rate structure, like I said, because the hydroelectric plant runs 24/7, it is the same output every day, essentially. The rates average out to the point where if I take the kilowatt hours produced in a year and divide that into the dollars we produced, it came out to 5.58 cents within 1%. As I look at the months, this is the 5th or 6th month that we've been on this granular rate structure. Our average rate is varying within 10% so far. Maximum minimum was 10% different than these average rates per month. And I have to equate that to the granular rate structure, not averaging the steady hydroelectric output like the old rate structure did.
I'm going to give you a chance to make your pitch. Why should we have a hydro rate?
They're two totally different energy sources. And I'm an electrical engineer. I think the electrical system is a pretty amazing thing that we can string wires all over the countryside and have this energy available to us everywhere, anytime, instantly. So I respect what any utility does, Duke especially. Basically, this ought to be a business-to-business relationship. Hasn't quite worked out that way with this contract ending, but I value what they do, and I also appreciate the problem they have of integrating solar energy into a utility grid. We are a 1 megawatt hydroelectric plant. We have capacity factors that 1 year, I think I just checked this morning, we hit 80% capacity factor. That meant we had enough water in the river that we could run the total plant output if we'd run it at an average of 80% output for the entire year. No, that's not every year. It can be down as low as 50%. Drought years, maybe even lower than that. But it is a steady output. To create the same annual energy in kilowatt hours from a solar farm, you need a capacity of almost 10 times that rating, meaning it almost, we'll call it 8 megawatt solar farm, 8,000 kilowatts, is required because it produces energy only a few hours of the day to produce the annual energy that we produce in a year, running steady at a maximum of 1 kilowatt or 1,000 kilowatts, 1 megawatt.
Chair Belzer, I just want to put a soft objection in that I think this is exceeding the scope of his direct testimony.
Let's try to stay within the corners of your filed testimony. If the commissioners want to ask you about capacity rates that Mr. Snyder discussed, I'm sure there'll be a chance, but let's try to, because counsel's correct.
Okay.
We need to try to stay within the corners.
What was you, ask me the question again. I'm an engineer. I'm going to go off on tangents, but anyway.
Mr. Lamb, let's talk about your rebuttal testimony.
Okay.
In rebuttal, Mr. Snyder argues there was no legal basis for paying hydro facilities higher avoided cost rates than other facilities. And Mr. Snyder discussed Act 62, of course. We've heard a lot about it. Do you agree or disagree with Mr. Snyder about that?
I think Act 62 says that there should be rates for the different energy sources, and now I remember the tangent that I got off on. Again, on a solar project, the energy is intermittent, where we run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Due to natural conditions, when you don't have rain for a week, our output per day will not vary much more than a couple percent at the most, gradually falling off as river flows gradually get less. That is a huge difference in that Duke does not have to start a 8 megawatt generator to compensate for the energy that solar farm would produce if it were producing the same amount of energy in a year as we do.
Mr. Snyder, in your testimony, did you cite two provisions in Act 62 that you believe warrant a separate hydro rate?
Yes.
And are those the provisions from your testimony I've put up? Mr. Snyder, did I just call you Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, but I'm keeping up. We're all one big family here.
Now, Mr. Snyder disagreed with your description of Duke's rates as convoluted. What do you say about that?
That was just the term that came to mind. Again, I had not looked at these current rates until our contract was beginning to run out. Prior to that, the rate structure of 4 summer months, 4 winter months, 2 shoulder months, summer and fall, or spring and fall, had pretty much stayed the same. So the only way you can come up with an average, that's how the hydroelectric plant can predict what money it's going to make in the year, the energy that it'll produce, is to break it down to averages per day, and you have weekday averages and weekend averages, essentially. And then you average all of those months or those weeks, assuming 4 weeks in a month. That gives you an average rate.
Now, I'm an engineer, and I mean, you're an engineer, and I'm not an engineer. Is that the 8760?
That's this 8760 spreadsheet. And it's just a mathematical conversion of the description on the scheduled PPs. But if you compare the scheduled PP that we just left, that was in from 2011, I think, it's easy to calculate. You come up with 4 different rates.
Okay. And what were, just set the record straight, what were the 8760s you asked for from Duke?
What were they?
Yeah.
Just this spreadsheet, just what I was asking for, and this spreadsheet here that has the zeros in it was the reason I was kind of asking for it, is to confirm that I had read the text of the scheduled PPs correctly and populated the spreadsheet correctly. And this spreadsheet has to be there because that's the way Duke is billing us. They bill us by the hour. That's where they come up with these different quantities of energy.
Are you aware that the commission has an independent expert in this docket?
Yes, I am.
And what would you like to ask, or recommend to the commission to ask of its independent expert?
Chair Belser, this is also not in his rebuttal.
It
pre-file
is.
testimony.
Actually.
There was something about,
Apologies if I missed that.
yeah.
Ma'am? Or do you need
Go
me to?
ahead, it's on page 5, I think.
Thank you. What would you like the independent expert to do? What about with regard to avoided cost rates recommended by ORS? Do you think the independent expert should look at those?
Yes, he's raised several, again, and I'm going to brag on Duke Energy. Creating an avoided cost is, to me, trying to define something that's almost undefinable. The utility system is huge. It's made up of all kinds of generation sources that all have different costs and so on. It is trying to model something that is huge. In reading Witness Ming's testimony, he's raised a couple of questions that seem to make sense to me, like the choice of cost for combustion turbines coming from different sources and so on.
And we'll have a chance to talk to him about those, but that's all right. But you think they ought to look into his concerns?
Yes. To me, they carry valid questions.
While he's at it, do you think you ought to look at a hydro rate?
Most certainly. Again, I go back to the fact that the hydro plant, we have to use every bit of water that's in the river to survive. And the river flow never stops. It may change, but it never stops. So we run consistently with every bit of water, other than when high flow times when we have more water than the capacity allows. We use every bit of water that way. And just as an engineer, that versus integrating solar energy, which is only produced during sunlight hours, is a huge difference to the utility, and I think it warrants a separate rate schedule.
And I'm going to show you your exhibit TL7. What is that?
That is the data that I took off Duke's website. I started collecting it in 2005. It goes back to 2005 and then goes up to 2022. And it shows the cost of 1,000 kilowatt hour residential bill, basically retail rates for 1,000 kilowatt hours. And it has gone up whatever percentage it is since 2005. You can essentially take those numbers and divide them by 1,000. Admittedly, there's a fix to get a per kilowatt hour rate, but admittedly there's a 10 or 15 or whatever the service charges in there, and there's probably some other adders for fuel and so on. But it's a quick way to see how Duke's rates have escalated since 2005.
And what role should common sense play in the commission's determination, in your opinion?
As in any business, when a boat builder starts building boats, he's going to look at the boat market. He's going to think of what the boat market may be today and in the future. And when I think any, especially hydroelectric project back in the beginning of Purpose, started taking on the challenge of investing their money to rehabilitate a hydro project and sell power, you'd expect your rates to somewhat track retail rates. Yes, we sell to Duke, but ultimately that energy goes to a retail rate or a retail market, which is what's on those sheets.
Mr. Lamb, thank you. And please answer any questions council or commissioners may have for you.
Okay.
South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
No questions.
Sasiba,
No questions, but thank you.
Office of Regulatory Staff,
No questions.
Duke Energy.
Push your button.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lamb. Good to see you today. I am going to try to keep it as brief as I can, but I do have a few questions for you. Just want to go back over the timeline to start things out. I believe you just testified that the last PPA Converse had with Duke was executed in, is that March of 2013? Is that correct?
Yes, I think March or April. Or something.
Okay, and it terminated just this year in February of 2023?
Correct.
Okay. And do you recall receiving a letter from David Johnson in about August of 2020 providing Converse notice that the PPA would terminate?
Yes.
Okay.
In 2020, yes.
Yeah.
30 months ago.
Yep, exactly.
Sorry.
And that was about, well, it was 30 months ago, so
Yes.
about 2.5 years in
Yes.
advance of the termination. Okay. And am I correct that you first began discussing potential new rates and PPA options with DEC around October of 2022?
Yes, that would be, yes, we set a goal to start talking to Duke about a new contract before the end of the year, yes.
Okay. And at that time, you spoke with Mr. Mike Keene at Duke, is that right?
Yes.
Do you remember anyone else that you spoke with?
There was a lady on one call, Carla Bryce or something.
I was going to ask you about Carla. Okay. Anyone else that you remember?
Not in this period, this time that I can remember.
Okay. And is it fair to say that in October of 2022, and again beginning in January 2023, you spoke with Mr. Keene and Ms. Bryce multiple times and exchanged multiple emails about the rate options that were available to Converse?
Yes.
And what is your understanding of the rate options that were available at that time?
They all were less than the rate we have gotten for the last decade, regardless of what we signed up for, variable 5-year or 10-year, which will not keep the business in business.
Understood. But would you agree that the rates that DEC was offering you at that time, those were the rates that were approved by the commission at that time?
Yes, and then there was even discussion that we could have signed up for these proposed rates, even though they weren't approved. Possibly, but again, that doesn't solve the problem.
Sure. So, but let me piece through that for a minute. So it sounds like Mr. Keene, and correct me if it was someone else, let you know that the rates that were going to be filed in this proceeding would be higher
Yes.
than what you were available for. Okay. And ultimately, Converse chose not to enter into a new PPA with DEC. That's right?
Financially, you can't. I mean, plain and simple.
And
Mr.
so-
Lamb, I need you to talk
Sorry.
toward the microphone, please. Thank you.
Financially, that would be suicide for the business. That's my point.
So instead, Converse selected to receive the variable rate. Is that right?
That was the only choice, or just stop selling power.
just want to piece through your understanding of the a variable rate for a minute. So the variable rate does not create a contractual relationship between Converse and DEC. Is that right?
I don't know if I can answer that. In the past, there were several avoided cost periods where we just kept accepting the variable rate. We didn't enter into a long-term contract. And I'll explain that by saying if someone enters a marketplace expecting the value of the widget that they make to change, you might be better off to take the changes as they come as opposed to lock into a fixed rate for a longer period that can't change.
Understood. But fair to say that currently Converse has not executed any long-term contract with Duke. Okay.
No.
And so because there's no written agreement between Converse and DEC, there is no paper agreement whereby Converse is committing to deliver all of its energy to DEC. Is that right?
There's no in previous scheduled PPs, even at the variable rate, you were paid capacity. Some of the previous ones, again, they've changed some, but you still were paid a capacity payment and energy payment. It was just at lesser rates, which to me is the same commitment that you would make if you signed a long-term contract.
Understood that that's the obligation that Duke would have under the contract to pay Converse. My question was trying to get to, there is no paper agreement right now that obligates Converse to sell all or part of its energy to Duke.
Okay. But we can't sell it to anybody else. We can't sell it to another utility. We can't sell it to the house next door. You're the only market we have for the power.
And so I think you just acknowledged that, but you understand that by electing to receive the variable rate, Converse is not eligible under the Commission's current approved rates to receive a capacity payment.
By the current scheduled PP, yes, the one that's approved currently.
And so Converse is only being compensated for the energy it provides when it provides it.
It appears that way by the rate schedule.
All right. Are you aware, you're aware of the new avoided cost rates that were filed in March of 2023?
Yes.
And you already said that you recall Mr. Keene letting you know that those were going to be available.
Yes.
And do you remember that just a few days after that filing was made in March, Mr. Keene reached out to you to let you know that those rates were now available for Converse?
Yes, which seems strange to me that they were available prior to being approved by the Commission, but anyway.
Well, we won't get into
There you go.
Legal arguments there. Have you read Mr. Johnson's rebuttal testimony in this case?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm just going to refer to page 5, line 19, or beginning at line 19, and that's where Witness Johnson sets out the differences in the rates. So you're aware that the variable rate. Sorry, let me reverse that. The 2-year fixed rate that's currently available is 49% higher than the variable rate Converse is currently receiving.
Yes.
Okay, and you're aware that the 5-year fixed rate that's in the current proceeding is 50% higher than the variable rate Converse is currently
I think
receiving.
I agree with those numbers, yes.
Okay. And then last but not least, you're aware that the 10-year fixed rate that's available right now is 68% higher than the variable rate Converse is currently receiving.
That sounds right.
Okay. But yet Converse is still choosing to receive the variable rate.
I'm going to repeat what I said. We've been on a fixed rate for more than a decade. The day of reckoning has come to the point where we have to be compensated or we can't afford to run the project.
I understand that. Thank you for your time, Mr. Lamb. Those are all my questions.
Commissioners, questions for this witness? Mr. Lamb, I'm going to ask a question. I may come back later. As I read your testimony, you're asking this commission to direct our third-party independent consultant to look at the rates and make a recommendation for a hydro rate.
Yes.
Are you aware that we have this commission, none of the commissioners, none of the staff has any contact with our consultant? They provide a totally independent report. We don't direct them to do anything other than to provide an independent report. Are you aware of that?
Yes, as far as London economics.
Yes, sir.
I think, I
Okay.
thought you were asking about Witness Ming, but
No, sir. I'm talking about the commission's third-party independent consultant. They are hired, and then they have a contract to look at the record
Right.
and the testimony, but we do not direct them to do anything at this point.
I
We
understand.
have no contact with them until they come back in
in a
and-
month or so.
and provide us or send us their report, and then they
Yes.
come in and testify. You're
Understand.
aware of that?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, no.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Carolee Williams?
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Good afternoon. How are you?
Fine, I
Good.
guess.
I know the feeling. I have a tiny thing that might be a typo in your testimony, and if you'll look at page 6 of your original testimony, I just want to clarify a date that's on line 17.
I can look at it.
Let me know when you're on page 6 of your original testimony.
Direct?
Direct.
And you said page 6?
Yes.
Okay, and line,
17.
conference made on the 2013 PP under February 7th, 2013. Uh, PBA. I thought we had corrected that. It was February 7th of 2023. I thought we corrected that or something.
I just wanted the record.
Yeah, no.
That fits with the rest of your testimony.
Yes,
so I just
February,
wanted-
until February this year, yes. I'd seen that before, that's why I couldn't understand it now, but anyway.
I understand the feeling.
Okay.
In your testimony, you gave us your energy bill. Could you tell us, what the purpose was in sharing your March energy bill? What you wanted us to take away from that?
Charlie's a better filer than I am. It's the point that, and I went back and looked, if you notice on the last sheet is the salient sheet about my comments about not being able to read at sight that the correct register is accumulating the right energy. I'm not saying Duke's doing it wrong, okay? But we have read our meters once a day, every day. If I don't read them, people that work for me read them. So that we keep track of production. Kilowatt hours are our widgets. You need to know how many widgets you're doing to know if you're doing well or not. And in the old, prior to this automated billing system, and I want to brag on the billing system, it's great. The payments come, you can almost set your clock by them, but it doesn't quote any beginning register or ending register. In all of everybody's home meter and our metering that's still at site, we have registers that we read at midnight at the end of the month, beginning register at the beginning of the month, register at the end of the month, and that will tell you how many kilowatt hours you produce. Here, it is just the quantities listed. But going a little bit further beyond the register issue, we don't have a way at site to know that the billed kilowatt hour off-peak shoulder rate is being billed or accumulated at the correct hours of the day. Where the meter that we have at site from 33 years had a register that accumulated on the peak hours and another register that accumulated in the off-peak hours and a total register that accumulated all the time, whatever time of day it was. So you just don't have the metering at site to confirm this. Again, probably the heartburn from this, though, is that this granular rate structure, I don't think is going to be as predictable for the total quantity of energy we produce in the year versus an average rate as the old structure was. The granular rate structure varies so much that by average river flows, the averages worked in the past have given you a more predictable number. And so far in the first 6 months, they varied about 10% compared to what the average month would have been under the old rate structure.
And why do you think that is?
It's getting too granular. Hydro's consistent 24/7. It seems like it ought to work, but in the same breath, it's too granular. We're just for a steady output machine, it shouldn't make a difference. But again, I can see it in the first few months of billing that way.
And was March your first complete month?
Is that the one we? Yes.
Okay. Have the other months looked similar to this?
The bill exactly like this, yes, except in the old structure, you had 4 winter months and 4 summer months, and then the 2 shoulder months. In this more granular structure now, there are only 7 what I would call peak months. And I don't know if it's 3 in the summer and 4 in the winter or vice versa. But again, it's not as consistent. It's just too granular. So the next month may not have these exact descriptions of the rate buckets they talked about. Or maybe different, not that it's wrong, just different rate amounts might apply.
Right, right. Did I hear you say earlier that Converse had operated in a normal month or in a month where you were at 80%?
Correct. I think we've hit 80%, meaning our maximum output is 1,000 kilowatts, and we've had a month where we hit well over 800. I know we've averaged better than 800 kW for a month. Again, it's a wet month, a lot of showers and rainstorms.
So are you saying that your typical is 80% or most recently you were at 80%?
No, the 80% was, interestingly enough, one of our best months that we ever hit was in an August, a summer month, which is exactly opposite from what you would expect when rainfall would be low. But Mother Nature sends you the water whenever she does. So we can vary. I mean, there have been summer months, a couple months 3 decades ago, we actually had to shut down. The river flows were so low that we couldn't produce any energy. Now, we've done some things technically that doesn't make that as much a possibility today by improvements in the project. But that can happen. But it's been, I'll say, at least 10 years since we've actually had to shut down. So in those months, the capacity factor would be a whole lot lower, that to answer your question.
I'm looking at your Exhibit 4, and I can read this version better, Mr. Trina.
Okay.
Thank you. What had you hoped to be able to do had Duke Energy Carolinas been able to give you that information?
Well, the first thing it would have done is I'm sure they would have had numbers in 11 through 1600 on March weekdays where there's zeros now. I just want to confirm that I was Well, here's a question, and we just talked about it this weekend because my other half plugged numbers in a spreadsheet, 8760 spreadsheet, and and we got into a battle over this, as a matter of fact. One of the rates is called premium peak, okay? I guess I don't have the Schedule PB. It was called Premium Peak. And I had added that Premium Peak in a few hours to the basic energy cost, the off-peak energy cost. By definition, at the end, it goes through, summer peak, these peak numbers here, summer, winter morning, winter evening, premium peak, summer, premium peak, winter. At the end of the description on the scheduled PP, it says all other hours will be off-peak energy. Well, I had actually added 2 things there to make a mistake. So again, it was complicated to take that text and populate 8,760 hours. And it has to be available because Duke is billing it that way. Their automated billing has to be looking at their data from the meter saying you did X kilowatt hours from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock in the day. And so that's all I was asking for. It was misconstrued that I was asking them to do research and so on.
Right.
I just wanted to verify the mistake that we had in the sheet.
And the tariff for each
Right.
time. Okay.
Right. And again, the granular part is that it's varying that much. In the rate structure that we had for 33 years, there were 4 different rates paid in the year.
You know, sometimes you ask the same question and you get the same answer. Sometimes you don't.
Okay.
So I'm going to try.
Test me.
Okay. Why not go on to a fixed rate?
Because it would lock you into a rate less than what we have gotten for the last decade for the next 10 years. The best exercise for me having to participate in this hearing is to look at how well we can do at the 5.58 cents a kilowatt hour, and we can't maintain the project.
So are you waiting until we make a decision?
That sad as it may be.
Right. Okay.
Not to be disrespectful, but yes, this is a do or die situation. And let me just say one other thing. I mentioned before, for several 2-year rate periods, I would just stay on the variable rate. I wouldn't even have a conversation with Duke. The new rate structure would come out and you just go to the new variable rate, and they'd kind of track what retail rates were doing. To show you how convoluted or drastic reduction, granular, for whatever reason, this current rate schedule is it created a 50% rate reduction from what we'd been on for a decade. That is huge. It's never happened before. And again, I'm not at all arguing about these proposed rates, current rates being applicable for solar. I'm trying to say as an engineer, it is a huge issue for Duke Energy, any utility, to integrate something that comes online, gangbusters for 8 hours a day, but Duke's got to keep the lights on. They've got to run generators the other time. I have to say that that's part of the thoughts around the granular rate structure and the drastic reduction in overall avoided cost rate. Was that different?
You added to it. I'm glad I asked it. That's my bottom line.
Thank you.
Have you had conversations with the Office of Regulatory staff about these rates?
No.
Okay.
Well, yes. I think Andrew Bateman had a conversation somewhat to help me get to the PSC website, figure out how the hearings are going to be and things like that, yes.
Okay. And have you looked at selling the renewable energy credits?
Yes. Going to give you some numbers.
Okay.
All right. We've just had recent talks about them, and they are $3.50 per megawatt hour. Put 30, move your decimal point three places. That's 0.35 cents a kilowatt hour. The rate reduction right now is to what we're getting right now is 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour. It's a squirt gun and a fire hose situation.
Mr. Lamb, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Lamb, I want to ask a clarification for what you just said. You said in response to selling the renewable energy credits that it was a reduction of what, 3 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour?
Well, not the renewable energy credit. The reduction in 5.58 cents to 2.67 cents. My overall average rate right now. For 10 years, we were getting 5.58 cents. Right now, the average rate theoretically should be 2.67 cents.
Based on Duke Energy Carolina's proposed rates would be.
No, that's the current approved rate. The
Oh, okay.
proposed rate would be a little bit less, but again,
The proposed rate based on your Exhibit 4 is somewhere around 4.59.
if I sign a 10-year contract,
Okay.
yes. If we don't, it is.
And but if you did that, and then with the renewable energy credit, you would be above your current 5 point.
It's 0.3 of a cent,
Oh,
not
okay.
3 cents.
Okay.
The engineer screwed up when he saw the first number, and he thought it was 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour, but it's 0.35 cents a kilowatt hour. Is all the renewable energy credit is. So it would help, but it doesn't get you there.
In your direct testimony on page 9, I'll let you get there if you want to look at it.
Direct.
You're direct on the last page.
Okay.
On lines 5 through 7, you state the hydroelectric specific rate should proportionally track the retail rate increases that DEC has been granted by the Commission since 1985. How does tracking retail rates comport with setting an avoided cost rate under PURPA?
By definition, one could not have anything to do with the other. Okay, but as a business, let me turn this around another way. The markup right now between the variable costs that we're on and retail rates is like 400% margin. It's 4 times greater, meaning what Duke is paying us for the energy is a quarter of what is selling it to residential customers. In the past, the rates have been some percentage of that, not multiples of that. And as a business person, you would think that the two things would track. I think Duke in their testimony complained about me talking about consumer price index as a guideline of what a business person might expect. But they constantly talk about O&M costs. Well, O&M costs are affected by what the world sees as prices of everything. So I'm not saying it has to be exactly that, but to go the opposite way, to go down, is illogical. Would seem illogical to me.
Were you able to follow or critique the modeling that Duke did with regard to calculating these avoided cost rates? Okay, fair enough. That's fine.
It's a science. And again, to me, it's trying to quantify something that is extremely hard to quantify.
Oh, I agree with you on that. Believe me, I struggle with these. And then in your rebuttal testimony, your last exhibit, it was TL7 with the historical residential rates.
Correct?
Did you put that together?
No, that came off Duke's website.
Okay, off Duke's website?
Yes. Okay. I think you can go there and get it today. I had gotten one in years past that started at 2005. And when this all came about, I got the current one. It's actually 2 different pages, 2 different sheets. The current one, so I called Duke, the 800 number on the statement, to ask if there was any better, more historical data. What I would have really liked would have been all the way back to 1985, but they said the data wasn't available, but those came off Duke's websites.
The meter, and I'm going back to your direct now, but your direct testimony, you talked about, I think I'm on page 8, about the metering and the meter on site, the electronic meter. That's Duke's meter, is it not?
Correct, yes.
And you said it has 3 significantly visible registers. That is not sufficient for your, you say you got, either you or somebody that works for you goes out and reads the meter every day.
Right, we read, those are the 3 numbers that we can read, but the on-peak and off-peak register only pertains to the previous scheduled PP that we just came off of. Now, we would need a meter that had, I guess, 9 different registers possibly, except the rates for the same kind of period change summer to winter to shoulder month and so on. But there's no register reading these quantities of energy.
Well, and then looking at your bill, you're wanting to see the different periods or the different for the month. Is that what you're asking? I mean,
we can, the registers in the old meters change whenever that period was registering energy. So
they were set. If it was nighttime, it was
one wouldn't read,
rate.
right. Right now we have 3 registers, and everything is either on peak or off peak with the meter that we have now.
Okay.
Doesn't work with this.
So if it's on peak, that meter's registering. If it's off peak, the off peak meter's registering.
When we started the business, we had 4, 5 separate meters with the glass fronts, all with the little dials. Now it's done in an electronic meter that Duke is able to get the hourly data out of electronically. But the register on that meter is only total energy, on-peak energy, and off-peak energy, and some reactive energy numbers, which is too complicated to talk about here.
But you're not provided the detail of what they're able to read on which rate to bill for the month.
No, just the total that they say and I'm not saying that their automation isn't doing it correctly, but we watch during the site, or watch what the plant does daily. And if I were able to see that, it might let me explain why the granular rate structure is not coming out as consistent to just an overall time average rate like has worked for 33 years.
And because Duke didn't recognize the notice before termination clause of your contract, you got 30 extra months at an old rate, did you?
Well, it was actually longer than that.
5 years, I think. Well, 20, okay.
We'll
But you got extra time on the old rate.
Right, we'll go through some dirty laundry. The contract was signed in 2013, 5-year contract. It ran out in 2018.
Then they didn't, yeah.
The variable rate that went into effect then was like what I said had pretty much happened in the past, that it didn't change that much from the previous long-term contract rate. So the dollars didn't change that much. In February or March, I think, of 2020, the first of these new granular rate scheduled PPs came about. And we saw a rate reduction then of 50%. 2 months, consecutive months, we made almost the same amount of energy. 1 month was 33,000 and the next month was 16,000 with the same energy produced. And that's when I got an attorney involved. We talked to Duke, or he finally got in contact with Duke, made several 800 number, I don't know, you don't want to hear this, but made several 800 number calls, and it was hard to get calls back. My attorney was able to work through a Duke connection, and we wound up with a conversation with attorney. I don't think Michael Keene was on that call. But, and that's when they realized they had not sent this 30-month termination letter, which should have come in March of 2018. So that's why it's been more than 5 plus 30 or 5 plus 2.5 years.
Okay. Mr. Lamb, thank you. I appreciate that. Commissioners, Commissioner Caston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Lamb.
Thank you.
And I certainly do remember those droughts decades ago.
Yes, it was Atlanta got in trouble. We had, I can't tell you what year it was. It's probably 20 years ago, I think. But
Where I was, we were a tad concerned too. So, relative to the Lowhead Dam you have there, upstream of the Packlet, are there any dams upstream of the Packlet or its tributaries that you're aware of?
yes, there are. Spartanburg Water System operates Lake Blaylock, which is about 5 miles above me. Below or above that is the Spartanburg Water Treatment Plant, which they call Reservoir 1, a small reservoir. Then feeding into Reservoir 1 is Lake Bowen. The North Packlet comes into the South Packlet just below the treatment plant, above Lake Blaylock.
But you don't control the release or flows of those dams, correct?
No, I don't, and there's been issues with that, but right now we have a good, friendly relationship, and they are releasing water the best they can so that we can make the most use of it, which is wonderful.
You know, I feel unfair asking that question because I actually already knew the answer.
No, I
But-
figured you, I read your resume, knowing your background, I thought you probably
But I
would.
wasn't totally sure about all the tributaries, but, and did I understand you say that over the course of a year, I guess the 365 days,
Right.
that the average, I guess the Converse plant produced 1 megawatt on average over that time, 80% of the time was
Correct. We had a year where we reached an 80% capacity.
even though there would be times that were significantly less, the
But-
average was.
And then times at full. There's always the problem of water over the dam in a big rain, but there's not much you can do about that. Doesn't make you any money.
Rush into the ocean, I used to tell
Yes, it
folks.
is.
Do you know what percentage of your compensation for power produced is energy versus capacity?
In the old rate schedule, yes. I would have to take this. I can't answer off the top of my head. The
Do you know approximately, or, I mean, if you don't know, you don't know.
no, I don't. I don't know exactly. I'll leave it at that.
And so if I'm understanding everything I'm hearing, that at the highest rate Duke offers in this case, 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, whatever it is, I'm hearing you say that this would not be adequate to maintain Converse's business.
Correct. It's a rate reduction from the flat rate that we received for more than a decade. And cost of everything has gone up well more than a flat rate in the last decade.
And if I understood what you responded either to Chair Belcher or Commissioner Williams, is that if you can't get that, if you can't get what you're asking, you're going to close shop.
It's a serious day of reckoning. We have invested our money in a single-use facility, and for half of the period that I've owned the place, I've owned the property for 40 years, made power for 38. During half of those years, I continued to do consulting work in steel industry and so on. I've put a decent amount of good money after bad, possibly, for the improvements that we've made on the place, from the way we found it as a demolished facility. it's time to rebuild things, okay? And the 5.58 cents, you know, you fool yourself with business, anybody that's been in business. And what does fool you also is seasonally there are wetter years and drier years. So you have a good year, put some money away, then you have a dry year and you have to use that money up. But in the beginning, when PURPA was passed and everybody looked at every little stream and trickle, thought we need to generate electricity with this. I used to call it hydro fever, okay? And I'd say someone could look at a dripping water faucet and think they could make power with it. The lawyer that incorporated, and I'm going off, the lawyer that incorporated me, who just passed away in the last month, lived in the wilds of North Carolina with a beautiful waterfall on his property. And the college kids said, you need to put a generator on that. When I told Charlie that, not this Charlie, that when we generate electricity, there's not going to be water going over your waterfall. It's not worth it. I want to see the waterfall. But anyway, I'm suffering from hydro fever in a way. I'm trying to make a business work that the revenue's not keeping up with it.
Well, I can tell you where I used to work, we had a couple of mill dams that we used for hydro, and I think what you've done stellar, incredible. I couldn't find a way to make it work. But that, we could only use it internally.
I'm an electrical engineer by trade and more automation than anything. But in the mills, I like to see what the automation is doing. I want to go out and see steel made, look at the machinery work and so on. And that's what has taken to rehabilitate this project. It's made me a better engineer. I've managed to put my hands on things that you wouldn't have done for General Electric. So,
But all this said, and I applaud what you've done over the years. It's been incredible. You do understand that, you know, we have limitations based on what the statute says and what we can and can't do.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lamb. Don't know that we've met, but I appreciate you being here.
Well, I've
Thank you, sir.
enjoyed listening to your questions and all.
Thank you.
Commissioners, questions for Mr. Lamb? Redirect? Or no redirect? Okay. Mr. Lamb, thank you for your testimony and for being here today. You may stand down.
Thank you for your time.
I'm just thinking, hang on a minute. I've got a hard stop at 4 o'clock today. Do we want some, okay, Cecilia, you have no witnesses, is that correct?
That's correct.
Say CCL, you have no witnesses, so our next witnesses are ORS, is that correct? Do we want to go ahead, or do we want to, I don't know if we can finish in 40 minutes, and
Well, I certainly can.
I know you can, but
Whether or not, I mean, I will say, Mr. Morgan, largely discusses some of the analysis that was done by Mr. Ming, but I certainly don't know what the extent of the commissioner's questions would be.
well, you're going to put Mr. Ming up as well, though, right?
Oh, yes, ma'am, but
Okay.
I think that probably needs to wait till tomorrow morning.
Mr. Ming?
I'm a little reticent to put Mr. Morgan up at,
I'm concerned about that as well.
yeah,
And I'm,
so,
my plan would be, my usual plan is to start the second and subsequent days of a hearing at 9:30. And,
Madam Chair, may I offer a
Mr.
suggestion?
Torini,
Converse would not object if Mr. Mushin wants to put Mr. Morgan up. And then we could move to his cross tomorrow. And we also wouldn't object, I mean, we wouldn't require, I don't know what there would be for him to talk about. I mean, he would just put his direct up so that it's not like he would be discussing cross. And it might just be a way to save 30 minutes.
well, I
The
don't
pro-
know that it's gonna save 30 minutes because really it's just doing the summary and then that would be, so we might save 5 minutes. I
Okay,
mean,
well then it's probably
So,
not worth
yeah, I
trouble.
wouldn't.
and given what, you know, anyway, All right, I don't normally do this. I'm gonna recess until in the morning at 9:30, because I just don't see us finishing the whole case by 4.
Right.
I know I didn't like having witnesses under oath overnight when I couldn't talk to them about other things, about matters in the case, so. Yes,
Madam
sir.
Chair, would you object to our witnesses appearing remotely tomorrow if they know our witnesses are remote from Columbia? Would it be all right with you if were they to be recalled tomorrow to show up
Yes.
on WebEx?
If they need to come back for they can appear virtually. That's what you're
Perfect.
asking?
That's exactly what I'm asking, Madam Chair. Yes.
I have no problem with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else before we recess for the day? Okay. Thank you all. We appreciate it. We will recess until 9:30 in the morning, and thank you for indulging me this afternoon. I apologize. Thank you. We're in recess.